Measured. Jordan Hayes had spent most of his life designing spaces meant to bring people together. As an architect and urban planner based in Boston, he believed buildings were more than structures of steel and glass. There were statements about belonging, about who was welcomed and who was quietly excluded after 15 years of long nights, demanding clients, and projects that slowly built his reputation. Jordan finally reached a milestone he once thought impossible. He bought his dream home. The neighborhood of Maplewood Heights sat just outside the city. It's known for tree-lined streets, historic houses, and an almost storybook calm. Children rode bicycles freely. Lawns were perfectly trimmed. Neighbors greeted each other during evening walks. It looked like the kind of place people described as safe, stable, and successful. On moving day, Jordan felt proud as he stood in his driveway watching movers carry boxes inside. The house itself was beautiful, a restored colonial with wide windows and a deep front porch. Years earlier, he had helped design affordable housing projects across Boston, often hearing clients talk about neighborhoods like this as distant dreams. Now he was here himself. The first neighbor to approach was a middle-aged woman named Linda Carver. She smiled politely, holding a plate of cookies. "Welcome to Maplewood Heights," she said. "We're a very close community here." Jordan thanked her warmly. The interaction felt normal, reassuring even. Over the next few days, several neighbors introduced themselves. Conversations were friendly but brief, filled with careful politeness rather than genuine curiosity. Jordan noticed people often asked what he did for a living sooner than expected, their expressions subtly changing when he explained he was an architect. Still, he dismissed the feeling. Moving anywhere new required adjustment. The first strange incident happened a week later. Late at night, headlights swept across his bedroom walls repeatedly. When Jordan looked outside, a private neighborhood security vehicle drove slowly past his house, paused, then continued down the street. He assumed it was routine patrol. But the same thing happened the next night. And the night after that. A few days later, a letter arrived from the Maplewood Heights Neighborhood Association. It politely informed him that his front lawn grass exceeded acceptable height guidelines and required immediate trimming. Jordan stared at the notice, confused. He had mowed the lawn 2 days earlier. Whole work. Walking outside, he noticed something odd. Several nearby houses had lawns longer than his. He trimmed it anyway, deciding not to make an issue out of something small. Soon another notice arrived, this time regarding the color of temporary curtains he had installed while waiting for custom blinds. The letter explained they disrupted the neighborhood's visual harmony. Jordan reread the phrase several times. Visual harmony. As weeks passed, minor complaints continued. Trash bins left visible too long. Delivery boxes on the porch. A guest parting slightly over the curb line. Each message remained polite, professionally worded, impossible to accuse of wrongdoing on its own. Yet none of his neighbors appeared to receive similar scrutiny. One afternoon, while working from home, Jordan heard a knock at the door. 2 police officers stood outside. "Sir, we received a call about a suspicious individual entering this property," one officer said carefully. Jordan blinked. "I live here." The officers exchanged a quick glance, embarrassment replacing suspicion. After checking his identification, they apologized and left. Jordan watched their car disappear down the street, a heavy realization settling in his chest. Someone had looked at him standing in his own driveway and decided he didn't belong. That evening, he walked through the neighborhood slowly, observing details he hadn't noticed before. Nearly every homeowner looked similar. Similar age, similar backgrounds, similar social circles. Conversations paused briefly as he passed. Smiles appeared, but they felt practiced. At the next neighborhood association meeting, Jordan decided to attend. The gathering took place in a small community hall filled with neatly arranged chairs and framed photos showing decades of neighborhood events. When Jordan entered, conversations quieted almost imperceptibly. The association president, Richard Holloway, greeted him with a firm handshake and a controlled smile. "Glad you could join us. We take pride in maintaining standards here." Throughout the meeting, discussions focused heavily on preserving property values and maintaining community character. Malls were debated passionately. Fence heights, exterior paint shades, acceptable landscaping styles. Jordan listened carefully. As an urban planner, he recognized familiar language. Neutral words often carried deeper intentions. After the meeting, he requested copies of neighborhood guidelines and historical zoning documents. Explaining professional interest, Richard hesitated but eventually agreed. Over the following weeks, Jordan studied the materials late into the night. Patterns began emerging. Collar day. Regulations introduced decades earlier aligned suspiciously with periods of demographic change in nearby towns. Restrictions on multifamily housing, architectural requirements, increasing property costs, approval committees with subjective decision-making authority. None mentioned race explicitly. Yet the outcome was unmistakable. Maplewood Heights had been carefully designed to remain exclusive without ever saying so openly. Instead of confronting neighbors directly, Jordan began attending every meeting, calmly asking questions. Why were certain rules introduced? What data supported them? Were enforcement records publicly available? Some residents grew uncomfortable. Others became defensive. Richard often responded with vague explanations about tradition. Meanwhile, Jordan invested energy into improving his property, restoring the porch, planting flowers, greeting neighbors consistently. He refused to become the angry outsider some quietly expected. One Saturday morning, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Alvarez approached him while he worked in the garden. "You remind me of my son," she said gently. "He moved away years ago because he never felt accepted here." Jordan paused. "Was it always like this?" She sighed. "People think politeness means fairness. Sometimes it just hides fear." Her honesty stayed with him. Months later, the association announced a public town hall meeting to discuss expanding neighborhood regulations. Jordan saw an opportunity. Using public archives and city planning records, he prepared a presentation tracing the neighborhood's development history. The town hall drew a large crowd. Residents filled the hall, expecting routine discussions. When Jordan's turn to speak arrived, he stood calmly at the front with a projector behind him. "I'm an architect," he began, "and I study how communities grow. I wanted to understand what makes Maplewood Heights special." His opening slides showed historical photos, the neighborhood's early construction, families gathering decades earlier, community celebrations. Then the data shifted. Charts revealed zoning changes introduced during specific historical periods. Maps compared demographic shifts in surrounding areas. Policy language appeared beside measurable outcomes. Jordan spoke evenly. "Shet, these rules were written using neutral language, but their effects consistently limited who could afford to live here." Murmurs spread through the room. "I'm not accusing individuals," he continued calmly. "I'm showing how systems can shape communities without anyone realizing the long-term impact." A resident interrupted defensively. "Are you calling us racist?" Jordan shook his head. "I'm saying systems can produce exclusion even when people believe they are being fair." Silence followed as residents studied the evidence projected behind him. He ended simply, "Communities aren't defined by who they keep out, but by who feels welcome enough to stay." The meeting ended without immediate resolution, but something had shifted. Conversations continued in small groups long afterward. Some residents approached Jordan privately, admitting they had never considered the history behind neighborhood rules. In the weeks that followed, enforcement notices toward Jordan stopped completely. Security patrols returned to normal routes. Neighbors began greeting him more naturally, conversations lasting longer than polite exchanges. Change came slowly but visibly. The association formed a committee to review outdated regulations. Mrs. Alvarez joined eventually. Richard himself asked Jordan to participate as an advisor. One evening, during a neighborhood block gathering, children played freely across multiple lawns, while adults shared food and laughter. Jordan stood on his porch, watching neighbors talk comfortably together. Linda Carver approached again, this time without hesitation. "I think we had a lot to learn," she admitted quietly. Jordan smiled. Communities grow. Just like buildings. Owning the house no longer felt like proving something. It felt like belonging, not because others granted permission, but because truth had replaced assumption. As sunset painted the street in warm light, Jordan realized the greatest structures he would ever design might not be buildings at all, but spaces where understanding replaced fear. And Maplewood Heights, once defined by quiet exclusion, was finally beginning to open its doors. In the months after the town hall meeting, Maplewood Heights entered a period of quiet transformation. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. There were no public apologies or grand announcements declaring change. Instead, shifts appeared in small moments, the kind that were easy to miss unless someone had lived through what came before. Jordan noticed first during his morning walks. Neighbors who once offered quick, polite nods now stopped to talk. Conversations moved beyond weather and lawn care. People asked about his work, his projects, and even his opinions about improving shared spaces. The distance that once felt carefully maintained began to soften. The neighborhood association formed a review committee earlier than expected, inviting residents from different backgrounds and age groups. Jordan attended the first meeting, unsure of what to expect. Richard Holloway sat at the head of the table, looking less authoritative than before, more thoughtful. "We're here to examine whether our policies still reflect who we want to be as a community," Richard said, clearing his throat. "Not just who we were." It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. Jordan helped guide discussions using professional neutrality. Rather than criticizing past decisions, he focused on outcomes. He explained how urban planning historically used technical language to shape social realities. Restrictive architectural requirements, minimum property sizes, and approval-based renovations often appeared neutral, but unintentionally narrowed access. Some residents listened with curiosity. Others struggled, visibly uncomfortable, confronting the idea that systems they considered normal could carry hidden consequences. One evening, a younger homeowner named Claire spoke up. "I grew up thinking neighborhoods like this were successful because people cared more," she admitted. "I never realized rules could also keep people out." Jordan nodded gently. Design always reflects priorities. The question is whether those priorities still match our values. Gradually, policies began changing. Minor violations no longer triggered formal warning letters, but friendly conversations. Approval processes became transparent, with clear criteria, instead of subjective judgments. Meeting minutes were shared publicly online for the first time. Biggest change came when the association proposed revising housing guidelines to allow accessory dwelling units, small apartments attached to homes. The idea sparked intense debate. Some residents feared it would change the character of Maplewood Heights. Jordan presented research showing how such housing options allowed aging residents to remain in their homes while offering opportunities for young professionals or small families to enter communities previously out of reach. "This isn't about changing identity," he explained calmly during one meeting. It's about allowing growth without losing connection." After weeks of discussion, the proposal passed narrowly. The vote represented more than a zoning adjustment. It signaled willingness to evolve. Outside official meetings, relationships changed too. One afternoon, Jordan returned home to find Daniel, a teenager from down the street, sitting on his front steps, sketching the house. "Sorry," the boy said quickly. "I like drawing buildings." Jordan smiled. "You don't have to apologize." They began talking. And Jordan learned Daniel dreamed of becoming an architect, but didn't know anyone in the field. Over the next weeks, Jordan showed him design software and explained how structures balanced creativity with engineering. Word spread quietly. Soon, a few other teenagers stopped by occasionally, curious about architecture and city design. What began as casual conversations turned into informal weekend workshops on Jordan's porch. Parents who once kept distance now thanked him for encouraging their children. Mrs. Alvarez often watched from her yard, smiling knowingly, jaw building. Something again, she told him one evening. Jordan looked at the group of teenagers discussing building layouts. I guess I never stopped. Summer arrived, bringing neighborhood gatherings that felt noticeably different. The annual block party, once organized by the same small circle of residents, included volunteers from across the community. Music played later into the evening. Food reflected a wider variety of cultures and traditions. Jordan noticed something subtle but meaningful. Laughter sounded more relaxed. Conversations overlapped naturally, instead of separating into familiar social clusters. During the event, Richard approached him, carrying 2 drinks. I owe you honesty, Richard said after a moment. When you first moved in, I worried change would mean losing what made this place stable. Jordan listened quietly. I realize now stability shouldn't depend on sameness, Richard continued. It should depend on respect. Jordan accepted the drink with a small nod. Change, he understood, often required people to confront fears they never examined before. Later that evening, as lights glowed across the street and children chased each other between houses, Jordan reflected on how different the neighborhood felt compared to his first weeks there. The tension that once lingered invisibly had faded, replaced by something more genuine. Yet he also understood progress required maintenance. Inclusion was not a permanent achievement, but an ongoing decision. Inspired by the changes, Jordan partnered with the local city council to host an open workshop about equitable neighborhood planning. Residents from nearby communities attended cures about Maplewood Heights transformation. Jordan shared lessons learned, emphasizing listening, transparency, and data-driven discussions rather than blame. We didn't fix people, he told the audience. We adjusted systems so people could see each other more clearly. The workshop received attention from regional planners, and soon Jordan found himself invited to speak at professional conferences about community design and social belonging. He always returned to the same idea: architecture shaped behavior, but empathy sustained communities. Back at home, daily life settled into comfortable routine. Jordan worked on new projects during the day and spent evenings walking streets that now felt genuinely welcoming. Neighbors waved without hesitation. Conversations happened naturally, without guarded politeness. One autumn afternoon, Jordan received a handwritten note in his mailbox. Inside was a simple message signed by several residents. Thank you for helping us see our neighborhood differently. He read it twice, feeling a quiet warmth. The words mattered not because they validated him personally, but because they showed awareness had taken root. As leaves turned gold and red along Maplewood Heights streets, Jordan sat on his porch, watching the neighborhood move through ordinary moments, families returning from work, dogs barking playfully, lights turning on one by one. He thought back to the day police officers had stood at his door, unsure whether he belonged. The memory no longer carried anger. Instead, it reminded him how easily misunderstanding could shape reality when left unchallenged. Now, belonging felt less like something granted and more like something shared. Jordan realized the true success of his journey wasn't changing how people saw him. It was helping neighbors see their community and themselves with greater honesty. The house he bought as a personal achievement had become something larger. A place where conversations replaced assumptions and where growth emerged not from conflict, but from courage and understanding. As evenings settled across Maplewood Heights, Jordan closed his notebook filled with new design ideas. Somewhere nearby, laughter echoed down the street. For the first time since moving in, the sound felt completely natural. And he knew the neighborhood's strongest foundation was no longer built only from rules or appearances. but from a shared willingness to learn, change, and truly welcome one another.